I'm here today at what will be San Antonio and South Central Texas's first Arboretum. I'm taking a walk to a few select sites here with the arborist on the job. Scott Anderson and his company, Urban Tree Company, have been tasked with supporting this transition from what used to be here, the Republic Golf Course, into what will end up being a beautiful and majestic green space for San Antonians and visitors alike. And so Scott and I talk about the health of our urban tree canopy in South Central Texas and San Antonio specifically, what we can do to protect and increase that tree canopy. We talk about native versus invasive species. We talk about fire management. We talk about species selection. We do some species identification and see some absolutely massive trees that I was surprised to see myself. So let's get into it.
What's going on right now, in a physical sense, or sort of with the property, is some hazard assessment around, there was all this irrigation, it got shut off. A lot of the trees that were close to the fairways that were used to getting water stopped getting water, and so they're really struggling. So like a cedar elm, in theory, can do just fine with rainfall. But if it's been trained to get, like this one's a perfect example, if it's been trained to get irrigation, it's used to it, it doesn't know how to budget, and then it dies. Most interesting section of this is from the bridge, in my view. I mean, there's lots of neat sections, but really from the bridge, and this is where we see the most diversity, from the bridge to the low water crossing is where we find the biggest trees. It seems like the most untouched area, because this was agricultural fields, all kinds of random things for years, and then a golf course, and so the least amount of development and impact is probably along this area.
Well, and that might also be, like you're saying, maybe the areas that will be least affected by the changes in irrigation because it's been by the creek.
Exactly. So, where, we've got these trees really struggling here, this is a hackberry that may not make it or probably isn't going to make it because it's been, this was irrigated, this was green, that was probably green, this was all really nice, watered, and now it's not. What happens here really depends in large part on what the master plan comes out. So what will be the function of this space? There's spaces out there that are dense mesquite forests that honestly will probably remain completely untouched for quite some time, whereas this area is likely to get nature trails and interpretive things, and then up front you'll probably have a lot more infrastructure, that kind of thing. And then even in terms of what they do, that stuff will get phased. So everything, trying to suss out the priorities and those sorts of things are going to take a lot. So as much as I'd like to get in here and do all the things, with a limited budget and without the plan completely solidified, there's not too much to be done at the moment.
Yeah. So had they tasked you mostly with like risk assessment?
So we've done a bunch of risk assessment. We've cleaned up a few trees, things that we can showcase. I'll show you one here across the way that is a 75-inch diameter live oak. It's the biggest live oak on the property. So we did a little bit of cleanup just to try and make it accessible and safe, and a place to sort of take people and show them, sort of what's going on. These are box elders, right? Coming up here, and then you do have one of the things that we did was try and identify as many different species as possible. So you need, I want to say it's 21 different species on a property to consider it an arboretum. We found like 31.
Okay.
So box elder was one that we identified. This is a hackberry, and this is
that is the thickest trunk hackberry that I have seen.
and this doesn't even get to it. So we actually had to change. So for hackberries, ash trees, we had to change our metric. So we didn't tag every tree, right? So I'll show you over here. So we went through as part of the master planning, and we tagged both specimens, right? So this is a honey locust, and we can talk about that. This is the sort of specimen tree for honey locust. It's the biggest honey locust. Specimens, we want all the specimens tagged to get the species that we need to have the 21 different species. So, you know, we picked a live oak, a cedar elm, a hackberry, and sort of marked those as those are the specimens for the count, right? And then we went through and we tagged what we came up with the term hero tree, right? So these are trees that are exceptionally large for their species, and we really kind of, based on what we started seeing through here, came up with a metric, right? Of like, okay, you know, if it's a, you know, 24-inch hackberry, we're going to tag it, and that helped because we didn't have the time or really the money to tag every single tree on this property. So we wanted to get a good sense of what's out here, what are the biggest trees. Obviously, this is a really big tree. You wouldn't want to plan your nature center here, right? And so by identifying the hero trees and the specimens, you're saying, hey, this area is not necessarily off limits, but you're not going to cut anything down in here, and or, you know, say in the case of this 75-inch live oak, you might really want to plan something around this because it really showcases how big these trees get, or this is just a magnificent tree to point to. So that's how we structured that. Honey locusts are pretty cool in that they developed alongside woolly mammoths and giant ground sloths, and their defense mechanism to keep them off of their seed pod is this nasty, nasty needle. And this tree, one, these make it really nice and easy to identify when there's no leaves. You know, I probably would have walked by this tree if I hadn't seen one of these down low. Because it kind of looks like the hackberry with the smooth, you know, a smoother barked hackberry walking by it. When these have been browsed by deer or impacted in other ways, they can throw a full, like, bushy thorn structure that's almost impenetrable, and it's pretty nuts. And so that was to keep the giant ground sloths and the woolly mammoths from destroying them. And then likewise, we've got Osage orange, which is the hedge apple. It produces, it's a relative of the mulberry. It produces basically this gigantic softball-sized mulberry, and those also evolved along with the giant ground sloths and the woolly mammoths, and really those were the ones that were spreading the seeds, and they almost went extinct until people decided to plant them for hedgerows. Kind of cool.
Is there one in sight here? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got, you know, more hackberries, pecans. This is a pecan. We've got green ash growing out, which is really neat, really big green ash. This is one of the mulberries.
Yeah.
So this is a native mulberry that we identified on the site. Massive. This is like 24 inches. The mulberries taste really good. And then this is your green ash. I mean, you can see these things get really big through here. And behind you, here's another nice one. I think this is one of my favorite sections. Like, so where we came in, that was kind of an impenetrable thicket.
Yeah.
And the idea of that bowl back there, I think they've talked about it being like a little amphitheater. And so we came in with a bobcat with a brush cutter and kind of opened up that area. And then we started seeing all these different species that hadn't been identified on this site to date. Like, you know, when they first got here, a bunch of the sort of old school, older arborists came out and did a walk and identified some stuff, but hadn't found the, you know, the box elder, the Osage orange, the honey locust, and so that was pretty cool. Across the way, you see the sort of striped bark tree, and you can see like this tinge of orange behind the bark. That's a bodart tree or Osage orange, and bodart, it's French for, you know, wood of the bow, right? And so highly prized tool wood, a lot of that. I mean, so part of what figuring out a site is like, okay, why is what's here still here?
Right.
That was a highly valuable tree up until, you know, the recent history. Many of those probably got cut down around here, and it's only because it's creekside that, you know, maybe these things survived.
Yeah. Where do you feel like on the spectrum you can be of you're either watching a tree slowly die, or you or you have a tree that is thriving and growing?
Yeah, so I think, you know, you'd like to get help to the tree as soon as possible. This is the time, so we use the analogy of like starting a car, right? So the tree has a battery, right, of nutrients, water, cambium life, all these things, right? And in the spring, it hits the starter and leafs out, or doesn't typically. Like there's lots you can do for a tree that's in decent shape. If it's not going to leaf out, it's probably not going to leaf out. There's not a lot that you can really, I mean, you can try lots of things, and it depends, right? So you're in a forest, you know, and it's like, gosh, this tree is going to leaf out, but this one isn't, and you have hundreds of trees to deal with. Are you going to spend the money on this one particular tree to try and get it to go, or would you rather spend your money on all these other trees? If it's in your front yard and this is your only tree and you've already invested all this time and energy in it, would you deep water it, give it nutrients, direct trunk inject, you know, would you do all these things to it? Yeah, probably, you know, and so that's where trying to figure out, you know, is it alive, is it not? But honestly, you would have liked to have been doing that in the fall and really going, gosh, you know, this thing's kind of looking rough. What can we do for it in the fall to help it in the spring? Because if it's already in a water deficit in the fall, it may not make it through the spring. And whatever you do in the spring isn't necessarily going to help it after it doesn't leaf out. That's low probability, whereas you're watching it, it's struggling in the fall, and you water it, mulch it, loosen the, I mean, you know, all these things, that's likely bang for your buck to be way more effective. Yeah, early prevention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that something that homeowners should consider doing every single year, especially in periods of severe drought, or is it? I
mean, we recommend, I mean, the gold standard would be twice a year that you're coming in, you know, mulching, potentially aerating, you know, deep watering, deep root feeding, and or, you know, when you add nutrients, trees want to grow. Sometimes that's a negative thing because then they're eating up a bunch of resources. So oftentimes trees that are stressed, we're trying to use growth regulators, using surfactants to bond moisture to the soil so that any water that you do get, whether irrigation wise or rainfall, bonds to the soil, really loosening that soil up so it's a sponge, especially on the north side where we just don't have that much soil. Adding compost, you know, building that organic matter so that there is a bigger sponge. Any of it, all of those, and certainly mulch helps insulate the ground both from the cold and the frost as well as the heat and the dryness of the air. So yeah, I mean, you know, San Antonio's slated potentially to lose almost 30% of its canopy this year. It's potentially really bad. We're seeing a lot of red oaks die, a lot of pecans die. We're also seeing, you know, elms, hackberries. There's a lot of things dying because of the drought and extreme heat, right? So it's sort of two parts. One, you know, can you make it through a drought? But can you make it through a drought when it's, you know, 2 summers ago we had 90 days over 110? That's brutal. One of the struggles with Texas is that it's all private land, right? So this place will get a fire management plan, right? And I mean, that'll be part of the net, you know, once they say where everything's gonna go, then, you know, then obviously we start talking about fire management. I mean, a homeowner can deal with their property, but they can't deal with, I mean, just like oak wilt, they can deal with their property, but they can't deal with their neighbor's property.
Right.
And so it takes this sort of community-wide deal, and there is this Firewise community thing, and so like Chavano Park is a Firewise community. But you have to make the effort, right? And it has to be done in coordination with the fire department, with insurance companies. I mean, it's this whole thing, and it's doable, but it takes a broader effort, and I really think that's kind of what the, what do you call it? What the Forest Service needs to be coordinating, for better or worse. So yeah, I mean, check it out. Like, I mean, these, you know, we just got elms falling apart. So this is a good example, right? These are all coming out of the same trunk. Half of that elm tree's dead, half of it's live. Yeah, but that's something that, you know, from the ground earlier in the season is kind of hard to gauge. But. So this is the low water crossing. And I think is another pretty neat area. Like, you've got this giant oak tree in here. You know, this pecan's seen better days, but still neat and a neat habitat tree. And then you've got a lot of other really big trees in this section. So this is a cedar elm. I mean, this is just a phenomenal, phenomenal tree. This super lumpy looking tree over on the other side, that's another really big mulberry. You've got this giant pecan right here. This is pretty cool. This is an ash that's just massive.
That's an ash tree.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is the green ash, right? So this is different than the Arizona ash. This is our native ash tree. It's mostly a river bottom tree, and obviously they get massive. They get really, really massive. So this is Osage orange, you know, and it's got the you know, you can see the little bits of orange bark coming out there, and really, really pretty trees. And then this whole thing at one point this year was just littered with the hedge apples. You know, they decompose and go back in and then sprout back up, but pretty neat, pretty neat. I like these trees.
Does anything eat those? I know they're like rock hard.
So they're rock hard, they start to decompose. I would imagine that the wild pigs eat them, although not in the volume. I mean, this year there was a massive amount of them, and it wasn't like they just disappeared. Like, you know, Whereas like the mulberries, you could see that things were quickly eating the mulberries as they fell. This is probably not an ideal food. Like I said, I think that really it was only the woolly mammoths and the ground sloths that ate them and spread their seeds. And so then they're, because they weren't being eaten and decomposed, they weren't really spreading until people started planting them. So hackberries have a white wood. I think they're similar to ash. They're fast growing. I mean, I would guess 50, 60 years. I don't think, they're not particularly long-lived trees. I mean, hey, that's a long, we compare everything here to oaks.
Yeah.
And that's unreasonable. I mean, that big tree up there, this one, they could easily be 500 years old. There are a couple oaks in Texas that are that big, that have been identified, and people have cut rings, where they're ring counting gets real tough at that point.
Yeah.
But those are legitimately 400 or 500-year-old trees. That's unreasonable for most of these things. I mean, even the pecans, they can live 60, 80, 100 years. We have some really long-lived trees, but that's not, that's not necessarily typical for everything. So.
To kind of like wrap on a very informative walk here at the Arboretum, for the individual homeowner thinking about their own personal tree canopy they have, vegetation on site, what do you feel like are maybe some of the top things you'd recommend that they start to think about now, especially as we have increasing heat, increasing conditions of drought?
I think the first thing is just investing in the trees that they have that are quality and that they want to preserve. So making sure they're the healthiest as possible, those sorts of things. Whether that's mulch, nutrients, extra water, building soil organic matter so that you're building a bigger sponge. I think those things are invaluable. I think the next step is looking at the larger bit of the property of, are there smaller, is there dead wood, are there smaller, bushy shrubs and things that maybe are on the border or up close to the building, so either that would bring fire from, say, the neighbor's property, or that once fire gets to your property would bring it into your house. Thinking about the ladder, the steps, and are there's resources. I mean, I think you can go, I want to say it's like firewise.org, and you can go and they'll give you checklists. And then thinking about the structure itself. Are there things on the structure that are wood that might trap embers? So part of our training from Texas A&M is watching these insurance company videos where they take a giant warehouse and they light this barrel on fire and they blow all these sparks at a prefab house that they've put inside this warehouse, and watch the burn time till it lights on fire, and say, okay, these are the pockets where ashes are going to and embers are going to accumulate, and this might be a hazard. And so thinking about both, are there places where dry leaves and things that are easily burnable might accumulate? Are we, and seasonal timing of that too, right? Although now it's like, gosh, when is that time? But typically in our rainy season, maybe that's not really a concern. As we get drier and hotter, are we making sure that we're mulching this stuff in and those sorts of things?